I was 60 years old when the world I had spent decades building collapsed in a single season, as if someone had reached into my life with cold hands and swept everything off the table. At that age, you're supposed to be easing into a gentler chapter, collecting small joys, watching the world soften around you. I thought I had earned that kind of peace. I thought life would give me mercy. Instead, it gave me a silence so deep it rattled my bones, and an emptiness I didn't know how to carry. People often assume that losing everything at 60 means losing money. But what disappeared from my life wasn't just the savings I had folded away in neat, hopeful piles. I lost my home, my marriage, my sense of safety, my routines, my identity. I lost the version of myself I had believed was permanent. I lost the woman who woke up each morning knowing exactly what her day would look like. And I lost the confidence that I still mattered to anyone at all. There are moments burned into my memory, moments that don't fade even after 25 years. The night I sat in my car in an empty supermarket parking lot because I had nowhere else to go. The way the cold air fogged the windshield while I held the steering wheel as if it were the only solid thing left in my life. The humiliating ache in my chest when I realized no one was coming to save me. And the terrifying whisper that followed. If anything is going to change, it has to be you. I didn't know then that starting from zero would become the most remarkable, painful, liberating transformation of my life. I'm 85 now, and when I look back at the woman I was at 60, I barely recognize her. She was careful, predictable, polite to the point of disappearing. She lived inside the expectations of others, and she believed stability was something you earned and kept forever, like a medal pinned to your chest. I used to think life softened as you aged, but instead, it peeled away everything I thought I needed until only the truth remained. Maybe that's why I'm telling this story now, because someone out there is standing where I once stood, trembling at the edge of a life that just fell apart. And if you're feeling that way, I want you to know you're not alone, and you're not finished. Before we begin, if my voice reaches you in a moment where you need strength or hope, or simply a hand to hold through the dark, I'd be grateful if you subscribe to Grandma's Touching Stories. It helps these memories find the ones who need them most. And if you feel comfortable, leave a like and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I love imagining all the places where these words might land. Small kitchens, quiet bedrooms, bustling cities, distant coastlines. It amazes me to think that even now, at my age, pieces of my life can travel farther than I ever have. What I'm about to share isn't polished or perfect. It's the truth as I lived it, messy and raw and stitched back together with shaky hands. I lost everything at 60. But losing everything didn't mean the end. It meant I had to build a new woman out of the ruins of the old one, a woman who learned to stand again, even when nobody believed she could. When I think back to the months before everything slipped through my fingers, I can still feel the quiet warnings I ignored. Life doesn't usually collapse all at once. It loosens brick by brick until the whole structure becomes too fragile to stand. But I was 60, stubborn, and too accustomed to believing that discomfort was something to be tolerated, not examined. Besides, I'd spent 40 years perfecting the art of minimizing my own needs. It's amazing how blind you can be when you've trained yourself not to look too closely. My marriage had been thinning like old fabric for years, but I kept smoothing the worn places, pretending they were still strong. We had once been a solid pair, or at least we looked like one from the outside. We raised children, celebrated holidays, built routines that ran as predictably as the tide. But somewhere along the way, we stopped reaching for each other. Our conversations became logistical checklists. Our silences grew sharper. I blamed myself for most of it. I believed that if I were kinder, quieter, more patient, the distance between us would shrink. I didn't understand yet that you cannot keep a person who has already set his heart somewhere else. I should have realized something was wrong the morning he stopped kissing me goodbye. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a small, subtle absence that made the kitchen feel colder than it should have. He walked out the door without our usual brush of lips, and I remember standing with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, wondering whether he'd forgotten or simply stopped wanting to. I told myself not to overthink it. After all, at our age, passion was supposed to fade, wasn't it? That's what I told myself to soften the sting. But goodbye kisses weren't the only things disappearing. The bank statements grew thinner too, though I didn't fully understand why. I attributed it to rising bills, unexpected repairs, the general unpredictability of life. I didn't know then that he had emptied most of our savings to fund a future that didn't include me. He was planning his escape while I was still believing we were both growing old in the same direction. The day I found out about the affair, the world trembled under my feet in a way I had never experienced. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I simply wanted to bake an apple pie, a small, familiar comfort, and I needed the recipe my mother had handwritten decades ago. I opened the drawer where we kept miscellaneous papers, and there, tucked beside the stained index cards, was a folded hotel receipt with 2 names on it, his and hers. I held that slip of paper the way you hold something delicate and dangerous, afraid that if you breathe too hard, it will combust. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat too loud, too frantic. I remember reading the date over and over again, hoping I was misinterpreting it, hoping it was something else entirely. But it wasn't. It was exactly what it looked like. Proof that the unraveling of my life had already begun long before I realized the threads were loose. When he came home that night, I didn't shout or accuse him. I didn't throw the paper at his chest. I simply asked him, in a voice that didn't sound like mine, "Are you in love with her?" He didn't hesitate. He didn't apologize. He didn't even pretend. He just nodded, and something inside me fractured so quietly that even I almost missed the sound. I thought that would be the worst moment of my life. I thought nothing could hurt more than hearing the man I had loved for 4 decades confirm that he loved someone else. But life, as I learned in the months that followed, has a way of showing you that pain can deepen past what you once thought was the limit. He moved out within days. No long discussions, no negotiations, no shared processing of the end of a life we'd built together. He packed his things with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it. I watched him fold shirts into neat stacks, place them into suitcases, close zippers gently, as if he were preparing for a peaceful vacation rather than abandoning the woman who had spent most of her life devoting herself to him. When he closed the front door behind him, the house exhaled a silence so suffocating that it swallowed every familiar sound. The ticking clock felt louder. The refrigerator hum seemed menacing. Even my own footsteps felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. I wandered from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of shelves, the cool surface of countertops, objects anchoring me to a life that suddenly felt uninhabited. But heartbreak was only the first blow. The second came with numbers, cold, merciless numbers that illuminated the truth about our finances, or rather, his finances, because he had kept me in the dark long enough that by the time I understood the damage, there was nothing left to salvage. I remember sitting in the bank office, hands trembling around a stack of papers, trying to make sense of it all. The woman behind the desk had kind eyes, but I could tell she was used to delivering devastating news. She gently explained how much money had been withdrawn, how accounts had been closed, how debts I didn't know existed were legally attached to both of us. I kept shaking my head, as if denial could rewind the last several years. But the truth remained. The nest egg I had counted on, the security I trusted, had evaporated. I went home with a folder of documents I didn't understand and a bruise forming beneath my ribs, a bruise made of fear. Not the sharp, frantic fear of immediate danger, but the heavy, suffocating fear of uncertainty. I was 60, too young to retire, too old to start over without consequences. I had worked part-time for years, but it was never meant to sustain me alone. I had relied on the promise that we would be together until the end, and in that promise, I had allowed myself to become vulnerable. Looking back now, I'm not angry at the woman I was then. I understand her. She did what she thought was right. She trusted. She believed in partnership. She believed that loyalty was something that protected you, not something that left you exposed. How could she have known? In the weeks that followed, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. I made coffee each morning. I answered phone calls from friends with rehearsed steadiness. I went to the grocery store even when I didn't need anything, just to avoid the emptiness of the house. But beneath every small task was a growing panic. How am I going to survive? The mortgage was too heavy for my income. The bills stacked taller each week, And when the divorce papers arrived, the weight of everything became unbearable. He wanted the house sold. He wanted a clean split of assets that no longer existed. I felt like I was drowning in obligations I hadn't created. The day the house was emptied for the sale, I stood in the center of the living room and listened to the hollow echo of my own breath. The walls that once held laughter, arguments, birthdays, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings now held nothing. It was as if my entire life had been erased in one sweeping gesture. I touched the doorframe, worn smooth from years of our children running through it, and tears blurred my vision. I wasn't just losing a building. I was losing the physical record of my entire adulthood. When the final signatures were completed and the check was handed over, I received only a fraction of what I was expecting, barely enough to sustain me for a few months. He had protected himself well. I had not. I loaded the trunk of my car with the few belongings I couldn't bear to part with. A box of photographs, a quilt my mother had sewn, a stack of letters from my children when they were young, and a single cast-iron skillet that had survived generations of meals. Everything else was donated, sold, or discarded. My life was reduced to whatever fit inside a small sedan. That night, with no home to go to and nowhere I could afford, I parked in the far corner of a supermarket lot. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I turned off the engine, and the sudden silence inside the car was overwhelming. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders and rested my forehead against the steering wheel, feeling the cold metal press into my skin. In that moment, the reality settled in. I had lost everything. My marriage, my savings, my home, my sense of stability. Gone. I was 60 years old, alone, frightened, and starting from zero. But even then, even in that bleak beginning, a small whisper survived inside me. It was faint, but persistent. You are still here. You are not finished. I didn't know then how long the road ahead would be, or how many times I'd break and rebuild. I didn't know yet that life still had unexpected kindness waiting for me, or that strength grows in the places that have been hollowed out. I only knew that I was still breathing, and as long as I could breathe, I could move forward, even if only an inch at a time. I didn't sleep much during those first nights in my car, not because of the cold, although the chill did seep into my bones, but because my mind replayed every moment that had led me there. The past felt like a film projected onto the windshield. Faces, arguments, choices, moments of trust, all tangled together in a relentless loop. I kept asking myself what I could have done differently, what warning signs I should have recognized, what parts of myself I had ignored or silenced to keep a version of life that was already slipping away. But dawn has a strange way of quieting even the loudest thoughts. When the first light seeped over the horizon, the parking lot transformed from a place of failure into something a little more bearable. I wiped condensation from the glass, straightened my back, and told myself that I just needed one good decision to start climbing out of the mess. One step, one direction, one moment of clarity. It didn't matter how slow I was, it only mattered that I moved. I drove to the library that morning, mostly because it was warm and free. Libraries have always felt like shelters to me, quiet places where nobody asks why you're there or what you need. I chose a corner table near an outlet, plugged in my old flip phone, and laid out a notebook I had taken from the house. Its pages were blank, crisp, waiting for a life that didn't exist yet. I stared at it for a long time before writing anything. My hands felt clumsy, as if they'd forgotten how to make plans after years of following routines that had been decided for me. Eventually, I wrote 3 words at the top of the page: what comes next? I didn't know the answer, but putting the question down made me feel just a little less adrift. I made a list beneath it. A shaky, imperfect list, but a list nonetheless. Find work, find a room to rent, rebuild savings, stay healthy, don't give up. I underlined that last one twice because it felt like the hardest task of all. Finding work at 60 was humiliating in ways I didn't expect. People didn't say it outright, but I saw the doubt in their eyes when they looked at my resume. I had experience, but my skills seemed outdated in a world that had rushed forward without me. Computers had become essential in ways I had never learned to navigate. Online applications confused me. Automated phone systems frustrated me. Everything felt designed for people who were not me. Still, I kept trying. Each day I filled out forms, made calls, and swallowed the embarrassment that rose in my throat every time someone said, "We're looking for someone more current," as if I were a broken clock. After a week of searching, I found a temporary housekeeping position at a small roadside motel. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work. The manager was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a voice softened by sympathy. She didn't ask about my past or why a woman my age was applying. She simply handed me a uniform and said, "We can try you out for a week." I cried in my car before I walked inside on my first day, not because I was ashamed, but because someone had finally given me a chance. I wiped my eyes carefully, took a deep breath, and straightened my shoulders. The work was physically demanding. My knees protested each time I lifted a mattress corner to tuck in sheets. My back ached after hours of scrubbing bathroom tiles. My hands cracked from the cleaning chemicals. But there was something strangely grounding about it. Rooms had beginnings and endings. Tasks had clear solutions. When I made a bed, it stayed made. When I cleaned a floor, it shone. Unlike my life, the messes there could be fixed with effort and consistency. The motel staff became a kind of makeshift family. Not close, not intimate, but quietly supportive. There was Rosa, who brought empanadas every Friday and tucked an extra one into a napkin for me. There was Marie, who loved to gossip about the guests and whose laughter filled the laundry room like sunlight. And there was Eddie, the maintenance man, who teased me about my meticulousness, but secretly appreciated how I made the rooms look better than the motel deserved. I never told them I was living in my car. Pride is a stubborn thing, even when you have nothing left to protect. I parked behind a casino at night, because the security drove by often, and people sleeping in their cars were too common to draw much attention. I kept my belongings in the trunk and changed clothes in public restrooms, timing it so I wouldn't look suspicious. It was a miserable way to live, but each morning I reminded myself that it was temporary. Everything in life is temporary, even rock bottom. One night, as I sat in the driver's seat eating a granola bar for dinner, I looked at the glowing casino lights and felt a wave of exhaustion crash through me. Not physical exhaustion, life exhaustion. The kind that settles in your chest and whispers that you're too old to start again, that survival is the best you can hope for. My hands trembled as I held the half-eaten bar, and for a moment I thought about packing the car and driving until the road disappeared behind me. But where would I go? I had no family nearby, no savings, no destination. Running wasn't an option. Standing still wasn't either. So I went back to my notebook, my lifeline. I added a new line: find a room, a small one, a safe one. The motel had a bulletin board near the front desk where locals posted advertisements: lost pets, used furniture, babysitting services. And then, one evening, as I was clocking out, I noticed a fresh index card tacked near the bottom. Room for rent. Affordable. Private entrance. Inquire within. A phone number was written in neat, looping handwriting. My heart thudded against my ribs. This was it. A chance. I copied the number into my notebook and spent the night rehearsing what I would say. The next morning, during my break, I stepped outside and dialed the number with shaking fingers. A woman answered, her voice warm and steady. "Hello?" I introduced myself and explained that I'd seen her ad. There was a moment of silence, the kind that makes you imagine every possible outcome. And then she said, "I'd be happy to show you the place. Are you available this afternoon?" I was. I finished my shift early, drove to the address she gave me, and parked outside a small pale blue house with white shutters. Flowers bloomed in neat clusters beside the walkway, and wind chimes tinkled softly in the breeze. The house looked gentle, like the kind of place where kindness lived. The woman who opened the door introduced herself as Linda. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled into a loose bun and eyes that studied me without judgment. She led me around the side of the house to a small studio space attached to the main structure. It had a separate entrance, just like the ad said. When she opened the door to the room, I nearly cried. It wasn't large, just enough space for a twin bed, a dresser, a tiny bathroom, and a kitchenette with a single burner. But it was clean, quiet, and safe. 4 walls that were mine to rest behind. A place where I wouldn't have to fear every passing shadow. "How long have you been looking for housing?" she asked gently. I hesitated. I didn't want to lie, but I wasn't ready to reveal the entire truth. "A little while," I said. She nodded, as if she understood more than I'd said. "The rent is low because I only want someone responsible who needs a place. I'm not looking to make money. I just like the company." Something inside me softened. I told her I had a job, that I was reliable, that I could pay each month without issue. She listened carefully, then smiled. "If you want the room, it's yours." Those words felt like a door opening in my chest. I moved in that same evening, carrying my few belongings inside with silent gratitude. When I lay down in the small bed for the first time, the softness beneath me felt almost unreal. I pressed my palms against the sheets and let out a long, shuddering breath. I wasn't homeless anymore. I wasn't safe yet, but I wasn't lost either. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild routines. I cooked simple meals. I washed my clothes in Linda's laundry room. I walked to work when the weather allowed. I saved every penny I could, stuffing bills into an envelope I hid under the mattress. I didn't know what the future looked like, but for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt a flicker of direction. Linda and I developed a quiet companionship. She invited me for tea some evenings, and we talked about ordinary things: recipes, gardens, the weather, memories of our childhoods. She never pried, but she made space for honesty when I was ready. And one night, over chamomile tea, I told her everything: the affair, the divorce, the financial ruin, the car. She listened without interruption, her eyes softening with each detail. "You're stronger than you realize," she said when I finished. "Most people would have crumbled, but you're still standing." I didn't feel strong, but her words planted something inside me. A seed. And seeds don't stay small forever. Life slowly became less about survival and more about possibility. And possibility, I learned, is the first step toward hope. Living in Linda's small studio gave me something I hadn't felt in months: the luxury of exhaling without fear. For the first time since losing everything, I could close a door and know I was safe behind it. I found a strange comfort in the smallness of the room. Its limitations made me feel like I could hold my life in both hands again, instead of watching it scatter around me like broken glass. My morning routine settled into a gentle rhythm. I woke early, as older people do, long before the sun climbed over the horizon. I made a single cup of coffee in the tiny kitchenette, coffee that tasted better simply because it came from my own mug. And then I sat by the window, watching the neighborhood come to life. Children walked to the bus stop. Dog owners shuffled down the sidewalks. Joggers paced past with determined strides. Life moved steadily forward around me, and slowly I began to believe I could move with it. Each day at the motel brought its own challenges, but I was grateful for the work. I took pride in the details: corners tucked tightly, towels folded neatly, floors cleaned until they reflected the light. It was physical work, but it made me feel useful in a world that had made me feel disposable. One afternoon, as I was pushing my cleaning cart down the hallway, I overheard two guests talking outside their door. I didn't mean to listen, but their conversation drifted clearly toward me. "She must be desperate," one of them whispered. "No one works like that at her age, unless they're out of options." "Tragic," the other murmured. "Imagine being that old and still scrubbing toilets." Their words stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. They didn't know my story, but they'd written it for me anyway, one made of pity and assumptions. I stood there frozen for a moment, gripping the cart so tightly my knuckles whitened. I felt the humiliation creep up my spine, hot and sharp, and for the first time since starting at the motel, I wondered if I truly belonged anywhere. But then, as I walked away, I realized something. Those women had built a life in their minds where age equaled uselessness, where struggle equaled failure, where starting over was a thing to fear. But I was living proof that starting over was possible, even if it was painful, even if it was slow. Still, their words followed me for days, echoing in my mind when I bent to scrub a shower or swept a hallway. I tried to brush them off, but the truth was, I did feel old. My knees ached more each morning. My hands moved slower than they used to. I felt my body resisting the demands I placed on it. And the fear that maybe they were right whispered through me like a draft. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I sank into the small armchair in my studio and let the silence settle around me. My body throbbed with fatigue, but there was something deeper that ached, an emptiness that couldn't be filled with work or routine. I missed connection. I missed being known. I missed feeling like my life mattered to someone. Linda must have sensed my heaviness because she knocked softly on my door. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she said as she stepped inside, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Sit with me a while?" I followed her to her kitchen, grateful for the invitation. She had a way of making her home feel like a warm blanket, soft lighting, the gentle scent of lavender, the clutter of lived-in comfort. She studied my face for a moment before speaking. "Something's weighing on you." I didn't bother pretending otherwise. I overheard some guests at the motel. They talked about me like I was foolish for working at my age, like I was pathetic. Linda's expression softened into something like sadness. "People say cruel things when they're afraid, and they're afraid of becoming what they think you represent. Someone who lost stability. Someone who failed," I said quietly. "Someone who survived," she corrected. Her words wrapped around me like a balm. Linda was the first person who reframed my life not as a collapse, but as a rebuilding. And that shift, so subtle, so gentle, began to change the way I saw myself. But even with her comfort, I knew the motel wasn't forever. My body could only handle so much. I needed something more sustainable, something that wouldn't leave me limping home every night. One morning, as I was making my bed, an idea slipped into my thoughts so quietly I almost dismissed it. But once it appeared, it refused to leave. I'd spent my entire life caring for others. Children, husband, home. I'd always been good with people, good at listening, good at comforting. What if there was a way to turn that into something more than just a natural tendency? After work, I sat in the library and researched caregiving jobs. Many required certifications I didn't have, but some offered training or allowed older applicants to start part-time. The more I read, the more something in me stirred. Caregiving was difficult, yes, but it was humane work, heart work, work that mattered. I filled out an application for a home care agency, clicking the submit button with trembling fingers. I told myself not to get my hopes up, but 3 days later, my phone rang. A woman named Caroline invited me to an interview. I dressed carefully that morning. Clean slacks, a pressed blouse Linda helped me iron, a touch of powder on my face. I didn't want to look younger. I just wanted to look like someone who still cared about presenting herself to the world. Caroline greeted me with a warm smile. She was in her 50s, confident in a way that came from years of balancing compassion with professionalism. She asked me about my experience, not just work experience, but life experience. It felt strange explaining how many years I'd spent caring for children, supporting an aging mother, tending to a husband who often didn't appreciate the effort. But she listened with genuine interest, nodding thoughtfully. "You remind me of the caregivers who make the biggest impact," she said. "People who know how to comfort and advocate. People who don't treat this as just a job." I swallowed, trying not to show how much her words meant. "But I want to be fair," she continued. "This work can be demanding, emotionally, physically. Are you up for that?" "I am," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Hope makes you brave, though, and I had enough hope now to inch forward. After a short pause, she smiled again. "We'll start you with a light schedule and see how it goes." I nearly burst into tears right there in her office. My first client was a woman named Nora, an 80-year-old widow with fierce independence and a wicked sense of humor. She needed someone a few hours a day to help with medication, groceries, and light tasks. When I arrived on my first day, she sized me up like she was determining whether I was worthy of entering her kingdom. "You look like you know what you're doing," she said. "Which means you'll probably tell me what to do. I don't like being told what to do." "Well," I replied, "I don't like being bossed around, so I guess we're even." She burst into laughter, and from that moment, we clicked. Working with Nora didn't feel like work. It felt like companionship. She told me stories about her late husband, about the time she accidentally burned her eyebrows off making flambé, about the neighbor who stole her azaleas 20 years ago and never apologized. I admired her spirit, her stubbornness, her refusal to let loneliness swallow her whole. One afternoon, while slicing strawberries in her kitchen, she looked at me and said, "You're good at this, you know. Not everyone has the heart for caregiving. You do." I paused mid-slice. Compliments had become rare in my life, and hers carried weight. "Thank you," I said softly. "Don't thank me," she replied. "Just keep doing what you're doing. People need women like you." Her words lit something inside me, a small but steady flame. For so long, I had been defined by what I had lost, but through caregiving, I began to be defined by what I still had to give. Within a few months, Caroline assigned me more clients, each with their own personalities, challenges, and stories. There was Mr. Thompson, who insisted on wearing a tie every day, even though he never left the house. There was Elena, who loved classical music and played old records during our visits. There was Harold, a retired engineer who never let me leave without hearing one of his long-winded stories. I learned their medication schedules, their favorite meals, their fears, their joys. I listened to their memories as if they were priceless heirlooms. I discovered that people become more themselves as they age, more distilled, more raw, more honest, and being part of their lives felt like a privilege, not a burden. Meanwhile, my savings envelope grew thicker. For the first time since losing everything, I saw numbers adding up instead of disappearing. The forward motion felt intoxicating. I found myself humming while I cooked, smiling at strangers, noticing flowers blooming along the sidewalks. The world felt lighter, as if it had finally shifted back onto its axis. One day, Linda handed me a small stack of mail. Among the envelopes was one addressed to me from my ex-husband's lawyer. My breath caught. I hadn't heard from him in months, not since the papers were finalized. I opened it slowly, bracing myself. Inside was a short letter requesting additional documentation regarding the sale of the house. Nothing more, nothing personal, nothing emotional, just sterile legal language. But seeing his name again felt like being doused with cold water. All the old hurt returned, sharp, bitter, unwelcome. I sat on my bed clutching the letter, feeling the air thicken around me. Linda knocked softly on my open door. "Bad news?" "No," I said. "Just shadows from the past." She stepped inside and sat next to me. "You know," she said gently, "he doesn't get to have power over you anymore." "I know," I whispered. "But sometimes the memory still does." "That will fade," she promised. Bit by bit, I folded the letter and tucked it away. She was right. The past didn't own me anymore. It just lingered sometimes, like a bruise that hadn't fully healed. As the months passed, I realized something unexpected. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone braver, someone who believed in her own worth. Starting over at 60 had felt like the end of the world, but somewhere along the way, it had become the beginning of another one, and I was determined to see where it would lead. I'm 85 now, and sometimes I still marvel at the woman I became after losing everything. When I was 60, I thought my story had collapsed into a pile of broken pieces too scattered to ever fit together again. I thought the best parts of my life were behind me, sealed away in memories I would revisit with quiet grief. But I was wrong. Life didn't end when I lost everything. It expanded. It reshaped me. It introduced me to versions of myself I never would have met if the old life hadn't fallen apart. There were nights back then when I lay on my small bed in Linda's studio and listened to the wind against the windows, wondering if I was strong enough to keep going. I didn't have a roadmap, or certainty, or security. All I had was the stubborn belief that maybe, just maybe, the future still had room for me. And looking back, I'm grateful I held on to that thin thread of hope. It led me to work that gave my life meaning. It led me to people who changed me in quiet, beautiful ways. It led me to dignity I had forgotten I deserved. Starting over at 60 didn't erase the pain. It didn't erase the betrayal or the nights I sat in my car and cried until my chest hurt. But it transformed the pain into something useful, fuel for resilience, compassion, and courage I didn't know I possessed. It taught me that losing everything strips away what is unnecessary, but never what is essential. And what's essential, I discovered, is the part of you that refuses to stop trying. If you're listening to me now, standing in the ruins of your own life, please hear this from a woman who has lived long enough to know you are not too old, and it is not too late. The world will try to convince you that your best days are behind you, that starting over is for the young, that broken things stay broken. But I am living proof that everything can begin again at any age. Even at 60, Even at 85, even now, right where you are still here. And as long as you are here, your story isn't finished.